All right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, we are going to be talking about La Llorona. And joining me is Rosa from Latinx Lens. It's great to have her back on the show, and I am glad to be talking about this movie. It is an interesting one and quite creepy, although, as we get into in the conversation, not really a horror movie, even though it's available on Shudder, the all horror movie streaming service. So we'll get into that as we get into the conversation. But before we get to that, I want to remind you, as always, to make sure you're subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. Join in the conversation in our Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces Facebook group. And also, don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also share us with your friends. We absolutely appreciate all the shares. That is, above all else, the way we get this show heard. So share, 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 and thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for listening. So let's get into that conversation about La Llorona. All right, so joining me today back on the show is Rosa from Latinx Lens. Rosa, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
I am all right. I am very happy to have you back on the show. It's been a little while. Last time was a not so good movie, so I'm glad to get to talk about a good movie with you.
Yes, yes, I am very, very, very happy to be back. That you just keep inviting me back, and I'm always gonna say yes to you. So happy to be back, and yes, excited to be here. And
I should say it like as we get this one started. I haven't done enough foreign films on this show, so I'm really glad that we're talking about this today.
yes, well, that's really good to hear. That you're excited about it. Not that you haven't done a lot of foreign films, but that that you're
Yeah.
excited to do this because some of my pieces are gonna be kind of foreign films as well.
Good, good.
Yeah.
I am very glad. My pieces are a mixture of that and some very mainstream references that I'm sure maybe people who aren't familiar with this movie will this will kind of clue them in as to what to expect if maybe they haven't sought it out yet before this conversation. Although, of course, we do get into some spoilers along the way. But let's start jumping into some puzzle pieces for La Llorona. What do you have for your first piece?
Okay, yes. So, for my first piece, I think I'm gonna start with Jairo Bustamante, who's the writer director of this recent film La Llorona from 2019, not the Conjuring one. Don't see that. See this one.
Yes.
Um, and I'm gonna go with his directorial debut, which is called Ixcanul, which is it translates to volcano in, let me see if I don't butch this name, but it's Chikel, which is the language of these Mayans.
Okay.
The Mayans that are part of the film, and yes, my first puzzle piece is his directorial debut. Obviously, there's so many commonalities between this and La Llorona. Aside from the director, we have, well, first, let me give you a little brief synopsis of what the movie is about. So the movie pretty much it's about a young woman, a young indigenous woman, who lives on the slopes of an active volcano in Guatemala. She is to be in a arranged marriage, and she's only 17 years old. Her name is Maria, and we see this is kind of a little bit of a coming of age story for her, for Maria, and then we see a variety of different stages in her life. We see, of course, we focus on Maria, but we also focus a little bit on her parents. They work in a coffee plantation. And then we see, of course, the wider aspect of social issues and how indigenous groups, this demographic is very much marginalized, and a lot of similarities with topics of La Llorona, very similar. Another similarity with the film are the two main actresses that end up coming
Right.
along for La Llorona as well. So that was pretty interesting to see. Yeah, so it's this film. it certainly gave us a little glimpse of what Jairo Bustamante had, his potential as a filmmaker, and man, even as a directorial debut, this film is visually gorgeous, and the story it tells is very very much important. But yeah, it digs in into I don't want to spoil it too much. I mean, it's from 2015, so it's not
Hmm.
relatively that old, but there's a few things here and there that I would want people to just surprise themselves with it. So just know that it does focus a lot on shining a light on the indigenous experience in a
Hmm.
colonial land, which is pretty much everything around here.
Right.
Yeah, unfortunately, but yeah, it's very much it was giving us glimpse of what he's able to do as a filmmaker, but also of the stories that he's interested in telling, and how these are stories that are very much well deserve to be told, particularly from his lens,
Hmm.
a lens that's very much underrepresented, and that we need more stories to come from.
Absolutely, yeah, and I haven't seen it, but I definitely would love to, especially after seeing La Llorona. I think Bustamente has a really interesting point of view with the way that he stages this film, and just looking at images of this other film, it looks absolutely beautiful, and it's definitely something I'm looking forward to checking out. And also that main actress is great in this, so I'm sure she's great in that as well.
Oh yes, they're both really really great.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna go with my first puzzle piece, and this one kind of it was one of the first things that I thought of after I finished watching this, and that's actually Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth,
Mm.
because it takes a different horrific, historical event, and kind of even though this is a drama, it places horror and fantasy elements within the world of that particular historical event. Of course, in Pan's Labyrinth, it's the Spanish Civil War. Here it's this genocide, Guatemala, and it is a very different setting, but to try to infuse horror and fantasy elements into that is where I got the connection here. And
Mhm.
I think it is important for people to know going into this movie, La Llorona, is even though there's so much horror to it, it's not really a horror movie, even though it's pretty creepy. And there's some scary stuff in there. It's definitely more of a drama first, and that's kind of the same way I think that Guillermo del Toro the direction he takes with Pan's Labyrinth is you're getting this kind of like fantasy drama that has these horror elements that brings it squarely into that genre world, but is definitely not just trying to scare you the whole time. And so it's definitely,
Yeah.
if you're not a fan of horror movies, it's not really that kind of a thing.
Right, yes. That, and I'm glad you point that out, because yes, La Llorona is not your main street jump scare kind of horror film. If you're jumping into this film expecting that, you're going to be very much disappointed.
Hmm.
However, you will have a good time watching this masterpiece.
Yes.
um and it's funny, I'm glad you bring up Pan's Labyrinth, because my next puzzle piece is certainly a Guillermo del Toro film, but I went with The Devil's Backbone, actually.
Sure.
Yeah, from 2001. Similarly, for the reasons you just set out. But I guess for me, because okay, so if you have not seen The Devil's Backbone, it pretty much follows a 10-year-old boy. His name is Carlos, and he arrives to an orphanage that's currently taking a lot of these orphans from the war, which is the movie that's right before Pan's Labyrinth. So this movie is right at the end of the Spanish Civil War, and we have Carlos. He goes into this orphanage, and then he has to find his way through the orphanage, and then gradually he figures out about the historical events that happen in this orphanage. including a little ghost of a little young boy who was murdered in the orphanage named Santi. So, like you just said, having these horror elements and these fantastical elements as well, incorporated in a situation like this one, the Devil's Backbone, where we have the orphanage, that it's literally a visualization of the Civil War. Because within the orphanage, of course, you have your villains, you have people who are trying to protect these children, and then we also see what I particularly found a lot of similarities with in La Llorona was the ghost. We have the
Hmm.
ghost of Santi here, and then we have the legendary ghost of La Llorona, both of whom are, in this case, Santi. He is looked upon initially. Of course, it's a ghost, it's a monster. We're
Yeah.
led to believe, we automatically assume that he's the villain of the story, but in reality, we get more as the film progresses. We learn about his story. We learn why he's seeking whoever he's seeking, and kind of similar to La Llorona, she enters the film with a purpose.
Yeah.
So what actually, yeah, I will probably reserve what I was about to say right now in terms of these characters, because I'll probably just save it for the next piece. But yes,
Okay.
The Devil's Backbone with by Guillermo del Toro, just found a lot of similarities with La Llorona as well.
Awesome. Awesome. And yeah, and I think that, just putting those two together, those two Guillermo del Toro movies, that it
Yeah.
really kind of just goes to show just how this is in like a tradition of bringing horror elements to real world dramatic, stories. And that I think that kind of like brings people who maybe wouldn't have been there for that kind of story, like maybe people who aren't, into a historical drama, but then they hear that, oh, there's going to be horror stuff involved, and it definitely brings in a different audience, which is a great thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I'll go for my next puzzle piece, and this one might seem a little out of left field, but I'm going to go with Ari Aster's Hereditary. And the reason I think there's a parallel here is because, and spoiler alert for Hereditary, but the family in this movie Hereditary, they're going through all of this hell basically because of the sins of the grandmother of the family. And here in La
Okay.
Llorona, you've got the sins of the father of this family, who is this dictator who has done these just horrendous, atrocious things during war, and so this family has to basically pay for that and has to be put through this awful situation, being stuck inside their house and fearing for their safety and the weird, crazy stuff going on around them. So yeah, the reason for all of this dates back to, in Hereditary, a matriarchal figure, but here a patriarch figure, and so it's
Mhm.
a little bit of a different version of it, but a good parallel, I think.
Interesting. I had not thought about that. That's a good pick.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I'm glad
yeah,
you
that's
like
a
that.
good pick. Yes. Did you hear like my brain just be blown away while you were explaining this? I was like, oh, okay, I see where he's going with this.
I got it.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
sometimes the puzzle pieces come from weird places, but if it works, it works.
Yeah.
Well, what do you got next?
Okay, so my next piece, and this is the one that I was referring to earlier when right before we recorded, I was like, oh, I don't know how you're gonna feel about this.
Okay.
Um, but it's obvious. For me it is, since we already talked about two of his films. And I was just gonna use Guillermo del Toro in general as a filmmaker and his impact in the horror film as one of my pieces.
Okay. Cool.
If that's okay with you.
That's fine. Yeah, I mean
Okay.
his influence ranges really far, so absolutely.
Yes. Okay, cool. So yes, what Guillermo del Toro has done, particularly with his first three films, and it's something we've already been talking about, in terms of utilizing the horror genre with the drama, and then also sending this political message, or using this social political commentary or narrative within his films. that's very much present all throughout La Llorona, and how Guillermo del Toro happens to like rewrite or bend or somehow modify per se a genre like the horror genre that was already so established,
Hmm.
particularly in Hollywood, with these conventions of your stereotypical monster stories where the monster is the evil one and that's it. But along comes Guillermo del Toro and gives it a little twist where he makes his characters a bit more complex and finds a way, manages to find a way to make his monsters somehow sympathetic
Yes.
for the audience to feel sympathetic towards these monsters, and manages to find a way to showcase that in reality, majority of the times, the true villains and the true monsters on this earth are men or human.
Yeah.
Although in his films they're men.
That,
Um,
yeah, a lot of the
yeah,
time.
yeah, a lot of the times,
Yeah.
man. Hello.
Yeah.
I just don't want like, oh my gosh, he's so second. But I found out that that was also very much shown within La Llorona. We see how yes, we do have this legendary ghost that's present, and she does tend to do all these fantastical things, but in reality the true villain in that film is the grandfather. It is the
Yes.
guy who's done all these atrocious things to the Maya community, and that's something that's very much something I truly admire from Del Toro. That I'm pretty sure he picked a lot from his own experience. Considering I'm pretty sure it was either an interview or a speech he's made, but he's always been vocal about how his monsters were the ones that he's always resorted to every time he was alone, or every time he just needed something or somebody to just seek out. His monsters were always there with him.
Yeah.
So and it's very intriguing and very interesting to see how in a lot of his films these men are very powerful fascist ideology men
Yes. Yes.
that are the ones that are the most villainous and the most monstrous of all, which very much parallels with La Llorona.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing just to add to that
Mm-hmm.
is he really loves his fairy tales.
Yeah.
And La Llorona being, just, classic, fairy tale style story about this particular character, this folklore. I mean, I just think that it's the kind of thing that I could have pictured him making, a
Oh
La
yeah.
Llorona type movie for sure.
Easily. Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually a bit surprised that he hasn't.
I know, right? It
Yeah.
totally seems like something he'd do. But
Yeah.
and you would expect too that if he did, it wouldn't be like straightforward. Like we probably shouldn't even bring it up again. But like the Curse of La Llorona. But it wouldn't be something straightforward like that. It would be something that blends in some kind of other story in like a really interesting way, the way that this movie does.
Yes, absolutely. Oh yes, absolutely. I can definitely see that.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna actually use what you were just saying about about the villain, really being the man at the center of this family, and
Mm-hmm.
finding out about who the real monster is. I'm gonna go with a puzzle piece that is probably gonna seem a little silly, but it works for me, and we'll see what you think here. I'm gonna go with 10 Cloverfield Lane. Okay, so
Okay.
for me, obviously these are very different movies. It's a very different setup, but the two kidnapped people in 10 Cloverfield Lane who are being held at a bunker with John Goodman, and he's making it sound like they can't go outside or they'll die.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end, it turns out that he is the monster, at least until he isn't, and there's a big space alien. But that's kind of an epilogue to the movie. But the main story, he's the monster. And really, what's outside is definitely not the thing to be scared of. It's him. And that brings me to La Llorona, which is all these protesters outside, which the family thinks are so
Mm.
scary, and they're stuck in this house, and they're scared for their lives because of it. But really, the real monster of this movie is absolutely the dictator, the grandfather. This guy,
Yeah.
even though he's a little old man at this point, he is a terrible monster, and has been responsible for just like unspeakable things, and that is who these people should be scared of the whole time,
Exactly.
but they're not. And so that's where the comparison, I think, comes in.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. I can see that.
And that, I mean, I just love that movie so much. So
Yeah.
and I'm always glad to bring it in, even if it's one of these weird ones. I'm very happy to bring it in.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
so do you have another puzzle piece?
I do. So my next puzzle piece is La Teta Asustada, The Milk of Sorrow from 2009. It's directed by Claudia Llosa, and it follows an indigenous woman, but her name is Fausta, and she suffers from a rare disease called milk of sorrow, a disease that's believed to be transmitted through her via breast milk from either most likely her mother that unfortunately was raped. She's
Hmm.
sadly the product of rape.
Hmm.
So the film just follows her and throughout the film, trying to seek jobs to earn money so she can bury her mother, and we see the generational trauma between her, because her mother had inflicted so much fear into her, such so I don't know if I'm allowed to get very graphic or not. um
That's okay.
but it's just unfortunate that this is the
Yeah.
extent that she has to go to. Her mother inflicted so much fear, that of course, in this case, women have to be the ones to protect themselves from rape.
Hmm.
And in her case, she inserts a potato in her genital area. We'll
Hmm.
just leave it at that, to prevent rape, so nobody
Wow.
would rape her. And of course, it's something that's very traumatic. That's the extent that she's willing to go for this not to happen. Pretty much for history, for to prevent history from repeating itself.
Right.
So I mean, the film is beautifully shot, and the acting is very very solid. And of course, in comparison to La Llorona, following indigenous groups, but also highlighting what it's like to be a woman in a patriarchal society, particularly an indigenous woman,
Sure.
who has to put up with all of this just because she's a woman and she's an indigenous woman. And yeah, I think she through her journey she finds a job as a housekeeper, of course, of a rich white criollo, per se, or Spaniard. And same thing, exploitation. She does not get paid the amount that she was promised. And yeah, it's just the belittling again, the oppressing of the indigenous groups. And it's certainly a film that I highly recommend watching. I mean, it was nominated for a reason. It's a really really strong and great film to watch.
Yeah.
But it's certainly a powerful one, and one that I can certainly see having a little influence in La Llorona.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds brutal.
Oh
It
yeah.
sounds really brutal, but it sounds
Yeah.
great. I will have to seek that one out. I have not seen it.
Yeah.
That's actually a good setup for the next piece that I was going to bring up. Speaking about indigenous people and just how hard some people have it, and I thought of Coron's Roma and
Mm.
the maid character who we are following. And yeah, and with La Llorona, this rich, wealthy family treats their help so poorly. And you really see just that divide in the classes, and just how these people just treat them like such shit. And even though they really should have so much more empathy for people, but it's just
Yeah.
not there whatsoever. And in Roma, it's also just a deeply personal story about this woman, and what she goes through. and again about that gap between these two different classes. And of course they're both very different movies in the stories that they're conveying, but they're both very difficult movies to watch,
Yeah.
but are incredibly beautifully shot and well made. And so I think they're similar technically, but just different in what they're conveying.
Yeah. I can see. I understand why you chose the film. I'm not the biggest fan of the movie,
Yeah.
but no, I see where you're coming from in terms of indigenous representation and the class disparities and just
Yeah.
the mistreatment. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what do you got next?
Yeah, so this is another movie called El Norte
Hmm.
from 1983, directed and written by Gregory Nava. This movie, it's such a classic. It's an iconic film, particularly for Latin America.
Hmm.
Representation, and it follows again. It starts with in Guatemala, and it follows a pair of siblings, Enrique and Rosa. Well, hello, my name's representative, and they, of course, they're part of the Mayan indigenous community, and they have to leave after the government is murdering them and attacking them, and they just have to flee. And throughout the film itself is divided in three parts. The first part is it's called Arturo, and Arturo, who's the father of these two siblings and who is also works in the coffee bean plantation. He tries to form a union, hoping to seek better working conditions and salaries. And the government, of course, they find out. So that's when the attacks happen. So in order for them to possibly survive, they need to flee. Here comes the second part, which is called El Coyote. And here is just the journey of these two siblings going from Guatemala to the United States. Of course, you have to go through Mexico. And
Hmm.
then the third part called El Norte, which is when they arrive to the United States and what they have to experience as undocumented immigrants. And it was an interesting watch. It's an iconic film. I had not seen it until just recently, but
Hmm.
it's a movie that tells a relatively a story that isn't often represented. We do see a lot of immigration stories, a lot of crossing the border, but
Hmm.
rarely do we see our two protagonists being indigenous.
Right.
It's rare when we get that. So for it to be in this film and to be from the 80s, it's certainly something that I'm pretty sure must have at least paved the way for a movie like La Llorona.
Yeah, absolutely. I have never seen this, and I hadn't even heard of this movie, but it
Mm,
sounds really good. It sounds like a great film, and like you said, I mean, it's definitely a story that has not been told mm, enough at all,
enough.
and so it's
Yeah.
it's definitely a movie I think people should see, and I'm looking forward to checking it out.
Hey.
So that will do it then, because that is the last of my puzzle pieces.
Nice.
So I will finish this thing up with the finished puzzle, and we talked about a bunch of Guillermo del Toro movies, including his entire filmography. Really,
Pretty much.
we we also talked about Hereditary, 10 Cloverfield Lane, The Milk of Sorrow, Roma, and El Norte. So yeah, do you have any other thoughts that we didn't get into? Actually, before I ask you that, I did want to ask you a question. Have you seen any other movies that approach the La Llorona folklore in other ways?
I am so happy that you just asked that. I saw the Conjuring one,
Hmm.
which of course it tells the story that so many of us know. I grew up. My mother would tell me the story of La Llorona, and she would threaten me to somehow get in contact with her to come get me if I wouldn't go to sleep.
Hmm.
And I grew up terrified of La Llorona. However, her story was slightly different from the one I saw in the movie of The Conjuring. However, I just recently found out that the story itself, the legend, the myth of the Llorona herself, is the one that we know right now. It's a post-colonial version of it.
Hmm.
Her story in reality is one of the Mesoamerican ones. And according to the director, to Jairo Bustamante, the legend of La Llorona, the crying woman, is an old pre-colonial tale told through Latin America. In the story of Mesoamerican people, La Llorona was a kind of princess of divinity, almost like a superhero who cries because she has visions of the future,
Hmm.
which is completely different from the Conjuring one.
Sure.
And it's
Yeah.
different than the one my mother used to tell me. And to see that he somehow attempted to make this film and somehow reclaim that original story, that imagery, that story of this tale back, it is certainly something that really catches my eye. In terms of your question of La Llorona, I saw the Conjuring one. I actually didn't hate it as much as other people did.
Uh-huh.
I didn't love it either. I thought it was I thought it was okay.
Yeah.
But if you're asking if I've seen A Tale of La Llorona as originally intended, probably not until just now with this reiteration of the movie.
Sure. And yeah, I saw that movie too. We were gonna watch this movie, and my family somehow talked us into watching The Curse of La Llorona instead. And
Yeah.
yeah, not very good, but not terrible. It's
Right, right.
yeah, could be worse. It's
Yeah.
not the worst of the Conjuring movies. Let's put it that way. But but still not
Okay.
very good. So yeah, I think that does it for this La Llorona, though. Unless there's any other closing thoughts you had on it that you wanted to bring up.
I've been championing this film since I first watched it. I don't know how many podcasts I've been in talking about this movie because I really do hope it gets the attention and that a lot of people do get the opportunity to watch it. It's currently streaming on Shudder.
Hmm.
I can talk about this film forever, but I know you have things to do. So just go watch it, please. I was beyond happy and thrilled to award it the HCA International Film for our critics group. That was a
That is
blast.
so
And
cool.
yes, yeah, when they asked me if I would present it, I'm like, sure, I'll present it. And that reaction that you saw was genuine. I didn't know who was gonna win. So to see that envelope was certainly a treat.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, that was pretty awesome. But yeah, yeah, just go watch it. It's certainly a great film in every aspect, in terms of the narrative, in terms of incorporating this legendary ghost into a film with this social commentary and just the brilliant way that Bustamante manages to intertwine and incorporate her legend and like he said, he wanted to reclaim it back to how the original tale is and just to see that overall the technical aspect of this movie, man, it's just mind-boggling to see what he
It's
was
true.
able to do, those camera shots, those, oh my god, yeah, again, I can talk about this forever. Just go watch it. It's certainly one of those films that it's just brilliant.
Great score and sound design as
Yes,
well. Oh
and the
yeah,
acting,
absolutely.
oh my
And the
god.
acting. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, no, really great all
yeah.
around. Awesome. I think that does it for La Llorona. Rosa, is there another movie you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
I've been watching a few movies for Women's History Month. The last one I remember watching is the Michelle Obama documentary, Becoming. It's on Netflix.
Okay.
That was a nice treat. It was a treat to watch. Oh yes, I also watched RBG on Hulu.
Okay. Cool.
That documentary also, man. Yeah, the documentaries that I've been watching lately, so inspirational and very motivational and
Yeah.
loving it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's last year was a huge year for documentaries for me. I'm looking forward
Yeah.
to what comes out this year for sure.
Yeah.
But awesome. Why don't you tell people where they could find you and your podcast?
Yes. You can find Latinx Lens on every podcast platform. You can also follow us on social media at Latinx Lens. And me, you can find me also on I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Letterbox, and Facebook at Rosa's Reviews.
Awesome. And just to close it up, you don't think when we had our disconnect issues here that it was La Llorona getting mad about something I was saying, do you?
Maybe.
Uh-oh.
Or maybe the Hereditary thing, kind of.
That's
Either
true,
one
too.
of those. now you're scaring me. You know what? I kid you not. We also had, oh my god, now I'm getting scared. We also had some technical issues because we did an episode for Latinx Lens, where we talked about 6 Latin American films that were potentially that were submitted for the Academy for International, and of course, La Llorona was one of them. While we were talking about that, we also had some technical issues, and Kat was hearing some things going on in her house. So I don't know, man. Now I'm getting a little.
I was just joking, but now I'm getting creeped out. So.
Have you been thinking about a film for quite some time now? Have you got nowhere to turn to talk about it? Well, the Film for Thought podcast is here for you. Every fortnight, I invite a guest on to talk about any film of their choice. It could be old or new, controversial or classic. If you have some thoughts about films, I want to discuss them. New episodes drop every second Friday, so make sure to come along and check out the Film for Thought podcast.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about La Llorona. Thank you, as always, to my great guest, Rosa. And like I said at the beginning of that episode, I need to cover more foreign films, foreign language films, and, just really kind of get out of my comfort zone with, more of the mainstream or the indie, weirdo movies that I tend to like, but cover a lot more other stuff. So I look forward to doing that in the future. So if you enjoy what we're doing here on Piecing It Together, make sure you are subscribed wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you really enjoy Piecing It Together, we would love it if you'd rate and review us over on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. That is always awesome. We love hearing feedback on the show and love just hearing what you think we could be doing to make the show even better, but also love seeing those 5 stars, so that's nice too. You could also share the show, which is really, really helpful when you do that. And don't forget that we have a Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I combine content from Piecing It Together, Awesome Movie Year, anything else podcast related that I'm involved with, as well as my music career, which, by the way, I just finished scoring a feature-length horror film that hopefully will come out sometime in the next year or two, but the score will probably come out sooner than that in a way that you can all hear it, so I will, of course, let you know when that happens. But speaking of which, I always close out these episodes with a piece of my music, and I am going to close out with a piece of music from a film by that same director that made the feature that I just finished scoring. If you'll remember, last year I released an album called Beater, Original Motion Picture Soundtrack, that combined the feature-length film Beater from director Chris Johnson and a bunch of the short films that him and I had worked on over the years. And this is a piece from that. It is from a short film called Daisy, and it's a horror film. And this is the title track, Daisy, from that horror film. So enjoy this. I figured this would be a good fit for this movie, La Llorona. So enjoy this track called Daisy, which is available on the Beater Original Motion Picture Soundtrack, and look forward to the Jacqueline score sometime soon. And more Piecing It Together coming out real soon in the next week, because we got a whole bunch of episodes we just recorded back to back, so they are coming. So more Piecing It Together coming soon, more music coming soon, and this is Daisy.
All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.